Okay, we're Hasidic time here. Do we actually start 6:30? Is that how it's gonna work?
No. I think we can get going. Let me just let in one more person here, and we can get going. Just released an informal poll just about the demographics. If you can take the poll, just to get an idea of who came. We pitched this event in Haredi groups and OTD groups, and also in general groups. So it'll be interesting to see the demographics. It seems it's a third, roughly.
And we have people from London and Toronto and US. Obviously, I'm also in New York.
How can you tell? How do you know where people are from? Oh, you know people.
No. They're in the chat. People are saying in the chat.
Ah, nice. I didn't see that.
Yes, people are saying in the chat.
Okay, I think let's get started.
Okay, let's get started. Last person. Welcome, Shmuel. Hi, I'm Frieda Vizel, and I'm delighted to welcome you to a very special Zoom conversation today, which will be with Izzy Posen and myself, and hopefully all of you lovely people in the live Zoom chat on the subject of post-Haredi relations and identity. Izzy Posen and I both grew up in the Satmar Hasidic community, he in Stamford Hill, London, and I in Kiryas Joel, New York. We both left, and we both maintain very deep connections to this world. So there's a lot to talk about on the subject. This is what we hope to do with our program today. This is the outline of a program. We were thinking the first 30, 40 minutes, nothing is set in stone, but this is the overall plan, a dialogue between Izzy and myself. The next 30 or so minutes, a conversation with the participants, Q&A, comments, maybe talking to each other, and maybe possibly, if there's an interest, at the end, we might stay on and maybe have a chit chat, maybe, take it, no program, just free rolling with it. The entire thing, we expect to be about an hour and 15 minutes, give or take. One comment, if you're in the Zoom call and you want to say something to us for the second part of the program, you can leave a message in the chat and we'll hopefully see it when we get to that part. Okay, that said, let's begin. I'm excited. I'm going to start by passing the baton to Izzy and asking Izzy to tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us the cliff notes of your story so we know where you're coming from.
Thanks, Frieda. It's really nice to finally do this. I know this has been several weeks in the making. I reached out to you. I think I reached out to you. I've been following you for a while, by the way. I don't know if this is mutual.
Oh, really? I'm not on Twitter. This is why I don't have much I don't engage enough. But now I'm following you.
Oh,
I'm slavishly following you.
Well, I guess I have to deliver now. Yeah, but I've been interested in your work. I read your stuff, not every single blog. You publish a lot, and I've really liked the fact that you firstly you grew up in the same kind of community as I did. We're both from Satmar, although in that case we have that in common. But we're also meant to be enemies because you're Aroni and I'm a Zaloni, right? And that you can go off the derech, you can do everything, but that's still, you don't forget that. But also you grew up a woman in the community and I a man, and also you grew up in the States and I in London. So it'll be interesting to discuss differences in our journeys. But yeah, a bit about myself. I reckon many people in the audience know mostly, bits of my journey. So I'm not going to go on at length, but I grew up in Satmar, as I mentioned, in Stamford Hill, and I left that community in 2015. Sometimes I don't feel comfortable saying left. Sometimes I say I was kicked out, because leaving almost implies that you want to leave, and I often feel, how can I say that about my family and my community? No one wants to leave their family unless they have to. So and I think, by the way, this is something a lot of us grapple with. Were we pushed out? Did we want out? Did we wish our community was a bit more accommodating towards us? But yeah, I didn't. I had issues with I didn't really believe in the religious aspect of the community, and there wasn't really a place for me. And it was made very clear to me that I can't be part of the community. And since then I've been on my own journey, and I've gone to university, which was very important for me always. It was my main goal. I always, not always, but, from when I was having thoughts about leaving, I always knew I wanted to go to study physics and philosophy. It was very specific. And I've graduated this past summer with a master's in physics and philosophy. So,
Mazel tov.
Thank you. I haven't had my graduation ceremony yet because of COVID. But sometime, I think in July, I'll be paying an unreasonable amount of money to buy a gown and a hat that you wear only for 1 hour, and I'll celebrate. But yeah, the central question that I think, that I really want to explore and that many of us grapple with is what to do with, do we want to cut out all that experience from our lives? Do we want to pretend it didn't happen and almost be born again at a certain age? Or do we want to hold on to as much as we can from our, from the good things that happened in our youth, and hold on to that nostalgia and replicate certain elements in our current lives, and see ourselves still attached in some way to the tradition? So I guess at this point I'll turn it back to you and ask if how do you feel about these things?
Well, I think there's also an element in all of this of, is it possible even? Is there room for us to make the choices of not losing certain parts of our lives? Is it possible? It's interesting to me that you said that you aren't even sure about talking about leaving. You were pushed out, which is very interesting to me, because I think this I discussed with Naomi Seidman very recently about making choices, making decisions. The general narrative is that we make these decisions on our own and we leave. That's what generally, and that's what I say. That's what people expect me to say, even though, of course, it's a lot more complicated. The frictions that cause us to part with something that is so deep into our, our identities usually are a combination of us being pushed and initiating a departure. So, it's always a question of we only have limited control. There is a community that's very powerful, that has very strong values, that says very often it's on our terms that you are a participant in this community, right? So we don't really always have the choice. Do we have the choice? When you eat Lyle Shishi on Thursday night, Shalent, are you really part of the, are you Hasidic? Are you part of the community? Are you really? Do you get my question?
No, absolutely. And but the question is it a binary? Is it a you are or you aren't, right? I think for me personally, since leaving, a lot of the work I've done on myself, and it is learning to get comfortable with the gray. Because the way we brought up, it was very much a black or white, right? As you said, it was you belong in this community on our terms, right?
Exactly.
And there wasn't really room for gray. It wasn't really, well, you can be on board with 90% of it, and it's the other 10 doesn't matter. Or, okay, in my case, I wouldn't have been on board with 90%. I think if I was on board with 90%, maybe I would have made it work. But but the point is that, going back to the question of was it choice, were we kicked out? I think it is a mixture, but we have to accept agency as well in the choices we make. But often we find ourselves in between a rock and a hard place. So you are choosing either the rock or the hard place, but it's not a position you want to be in, right? And oftentimes I find myself thinking, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. I wish we can turn that ding.
Ding. Does everyone hear the ding? Do you hear the ding when someone enters? Andrew.
No. It's just the host.
It's just us. It's just us. Ignore it.
That's fine. Every time someone comes in, there's a ding. All right.
When someone is in the waiting room, it's distracting.
The way this is maybe going slightly on a tangent, but we'll definitely feed back. And this is something I wanted to discuss with you. What was I going to say? I've forgotten what I was going to say.
But choice, do we make the choice?
Right. Well, yeah. So the point is that we do have a choice, but it's an unfortunate choice to be in. We've been put in a position where we have to choose between living a life that we believe in, you know, and that feels with integrity, that feels true to us, or being part of the community of our upbringing. And it's not as if, often people think it's almost like as if we've thrown it away with glee. You know, we're so happy we've left and we don't have that whole thing anymore. And I don't feel that way. You know, it's not as if everything in wider society, you know, the cultural aspect, I have no issue with the Hasidic cultural aspect. It's not as if the secular British food is better than the Hasidic food that I'm used to. It's not as if the songs are better. You know, it's just certain things, the religious thing I couldn't get on board with. And I was put in that choice where you take it or leave it. And I made my choice. But over the years, you learn that, you know, you can retain elements of it that you like. And nothing is stopping you. It's your culture at the end of the day, the culture of your upbringing. You don't have to discard it all away.
I think that's the question to me. If you in isolation, outside of the ecosystem which nurtures the holidays, the moments, the having the children, all the stresses, if you haven't nurtured 6 months of making your house paisley and scrubbing the underside of your tables, can you then? Are you in a position to say I'm eating matzahs and I'm now celebrating this culture? It's a cop-out. That's like Reform Judaism. No criticism, just saying it seems to me to be a different flavor. That's what I feel about it.
It's definitely a different flavor. It's definitely a different flavor. The point is that it's a different flavor because it's based on a fundamentally different belief system, right? I'm careful. I'm careful how I say this in public because I don't want to hurt people, but, you know, I don't believe in, you know, I don't believe in God, you know, I don't say this often publicly because I don't think it's necessary. It's not important to say it, right? There's things that I feel are important, you know, talking about tolerance and friendship between people of different beliefs and different ways of life. I think that's super important, the message that we need to repeat and repeat and repeat. But for me, you know, the fact that I don't believe in God isn't, you know, I don't feel it's something that's important for the public to know or that I have to hammer on about. But the fact is I don't. And the fact is that my Yiddishkeit is based on my understanding of what's a meaningful life, of my what's meaningful in my life, trying to create a community, trying to celebrate positive memories of my childhood. So of course it's different. But I have lived both, right? You know, maybe you talk about, you know, how it's different from Reform. Again, nothing wrong with Reform, but I think for me, I have lived both. You know, maybe a Reform Jew, you can say, well, you never know the time. You know, you've never tasted the proper. I have tasted that, and I know which I prefer. For me, again, for everyone, something else is right, but I know what I prefer, and I know that this is still incredibly meaningful for me. I did a Pesach Seder last year for 10 of my friends. Actually, not 10 of my friends. There were 10 people. 5 of whom I had 5 friends, and they each brought another friend who I didn't know, right? So it was a really nice mix of people who knew each other, didn't know each other. And we did a proper traditional Seder, the full everything, the matzah, the murah, the kapas, the haguda, everything. And there were some non-Jews in the room as well. They weren't all Jewish even. And I taught them the songs and I told them the stories. And I was very clear about the fact that I don't think these stories actually happened, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. These are stories that have been told for 2,000 years. And they've been told to me and they have a lesson and they're meaningful. And we had a wonderful time. I mean, the 4 cups of wine helped. And I was very makbid that it has to be wine. You can't get away with grape juice, anything like that. And that's
why we only drank grape juice.
But that's why my Seder is more exciting.
I see.
I think the Chazal, they knew what they were doing when they said you have to have 4 glasses of wine. It helps.
So now you believe when it comes to wine, the Chazal's position on wine, you believe.
Believe what? I believe they were. Yes, I do believe they were wise people, and I do believe they were buying into a tradition that's, you know, that's a very rich tradition that I want to be part of. Do I believe that it was, you know, given mouth to ear from Moshe Rabbeinu, a Torah Sheba'al Peh? No, but does it make it any less important? If anything, it makes it more important to me. These are incredibly wise and interesting people, and look at their power. Then, precisely because they're just human beings, how many human beings living 2,000 years ago have people reading their own texts? I mean, these were clearly special people.
I mean, I hear you. I hear you. For me personally, in my own evolution, having a more historical understanding of Jewish past has been made it more accessible because the whole Himmlische thing, the whole, and then the Baal Shem Tov flew with Kvitzis Ader with some miraculous way to the other. It never sunk in for me because it didn't. How does someone travel in 5 minutes to a different town? What happened there? So I understand what you're saying, but I want to pivot. I want to talk about holding on to these customs. You know, personally for me, I like a Vadim song. I like a Chassidische song, but there is an element I feel that you are locked out of it. And I think that Hasidic community, there is an element, and I'm sure this applies to the entire umbrella of the Haredi community, there is an element that doesn't somehow closes off certain things. This kind of binary, the black and white, follows you out if you like it or not. That's my experience. So my question is, do you think most people who leave find that they have the option to find a gray?
That's a fantastic question. I'll start sharing my own experiences. I had to do a lot of very conscious work for years in therapy to unlearn the black and white. It was holding me back in life. It was hindering me in life, the black and white, the black or white. And, and I work through it, and I'm not perfect. I don't think people ever get perfect. And the day I'm perfect, that's the day I'm probably going to die. But you have to work. Why?
Yeah, go on.
The point is, human beings are human beings. We all have. There's no such thing as a perfect human being. But you work through issues, and to answer your question, is there an issue in the OTD community of maybe embracing a bit the black and white? And you look at the OTD community, and there is a lot of. Firstly, I just want to say this is. I often stand in awe, looking at fellow OTD members, looking at the community, looking at a group of individuals who have gone through, some have gone to hell and back. We're talking about people who have had their kids taken away from them. People have been kicked out from their family home at the age of 16, all kinds of things. And these are people, and people who grew up in an entirely different way of life, a radically different way of life, and have managed by their own means to, it's a nest. Every one of us who is even 70% mentally normal, it's a miracle. And I stand in awe of that bravery that we find in the community. But I think there's also a lot of trauma because this is a traumatic journey. And often I think the mistake with trauma sometimes is the problem with trauma is there isn't always a perpetrator. You can be a victim without there being a perpetrator. I've had, the biggest pains in my life have come from the people who are closest to me. And I know that they are feeling the same pain simply because they know they're hurting me. Because you don't want to hurt a loved one. But I think this clash of, we're dealing with a profound one. There really isn't a more profound difference between a Hasidic way of life and a secular liberal way of life. It really is, it's escaping North Korea. And it's different, completely different worlds, different value systems, different beliefs, different ways of living life. And you don't, a good friend of mine, an OTD friend of mine, was once having a conversation with his friend about, he was, the friend was struggling to, the Haredi friend was struggling to understand how my friend could just change, can look at the world so differently now, and how, and my friend told him, you're not going to understand because you haven't experienced the 10 years of pain that I've had. It's incredibly painful and traumatic to have such a radical shift in worldview.
Yes.
What are you basing your values on? What are you living for? We from the age of 2, we knew that we live for the Eibishter, right? And we live for Tzcha, for Ganeiden, and that's our Tachlis, and we're Eved Hashem. And suddenly you're left without all of that. So what are you living for? And you've got to go through a lot to build a more healthy life. But the point I was coming through a slightly long-winded way, and it is that I think in our community, there's often these traumas get expressed with there's sometimes a bitterness, and people make an ideology out of the bitterness sometimes. You know, we're allowed to be bitter because we've went through a lot. I think we shouldn't make an ideology out of it. We shouldn't feel that we have to remain bitter because we're righteously victims, you know, and we've been victimized. So therefore, it's our duty. You know, sometimes I even feel judged when I tell people that I've kind of tried to get over my trauma, because people are like, "What about are you saying that it was right what was done to you?" You know, if you're saying you kind of found a more healthy way of looking back at the pain, people think that you're now thinking that it was all right. No, you don't have to think it was all right, but you want to be living a positive life. You want to be living a happy life, and you need to find ways to, if you can, not everyone can, but it's really healthy to find ways to live with the pain and find more healthy ways of thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, I think I've recently heard the expression, when you stop being angry is when all hope is lost. People always ask me, why aren't you angry at the Hasidic community? I was never angry. And people, I remember going to a therapist while I was leaving. I was in a very difficult place. I was panicked. My whole life was falling apart. And I went to this therapist and I said, bragging a little bit, saying, I am never angry. And the therapist said, you know, being so hard on yourself is a form of anger. And then I realized I am always angry because I'm extremely hard on myself. But also, I think that expression that when you lose your anger, all hope is lost, stuck with me, because it made me think a lot of people who are angry and are not letting go of it, I think, are waiting for kind of resolution with family, with connections that are not resolving itself. And I think, you know, they ask me, why aren't you angry? And I think good on you that you feel that you are open to that kind of anger. I mean, I'm not saying in moderation, of course, but, you know, actually, to return to the question I asked about if we can celebrate to some degree Yiddishkeit, the world we come from after having left, I actually wasn't asking it from the perspective, do people who leave reject it, which I think they do. But I think, do the people who are in the community close us off from the option, say, in some way create an environment in which we can't have both? I don't know. No one is tying you down and saying you can't have chunt. No one is stuffing your mouth and saying you can't sing zmidas. But there is something cultural about the ownership of Heimishkeit. We own Heimishkeit. If you touch it, then you regret your decision. If you touch it, then you're living in Nabucco. There's something going on there. Do you know what I'm getting at?
I think that was absolutely true until maybe 5 years ago. I think now it's changing. And I think, and this is a revolution. I've written about it. I think we're witnessing something new in the cultural scene of what it means to be Hasidic or Haredi. I think I would liken this to almost the beginning of some kind of Haskula, enlightenment. There is, you know, I'd like to.
You mean the OTD movement?
No, something. So, you know, if we're going with historical parallels, you know, I'm quite fascinated by the early Enlightenment by Haskula. It's very interesting. And what you see in the beginning, the very early days, late 18th century, there's not mass, but the people who leave often convert to Christianity, right? They leave because the space doesn't exist. Exactly like you said. They said, you know, the community is very good at keeping it to themselves. And, you know, if you buy into our way of life, you get to benefit from the culture side. If not, you don't. And so in the late 18th century, early part of our school, you see people feeling like they have to convert to Christianity. What you see, the next generation creates a new Judaism for themselves. The next generation creates a Berlin kind of Judaism, and even the Reform later on. And I think, you know, I see historical parallels with the OTD movement. I think, you know, we're quite a young movement. I mean, we're 20 years old max. You know, the age of the bloggers. You know, the phenomenon of OTD. You know, I think if you Google the word OTD off the derech, I mean, it's probably, you won't get any hits probably before 15, 20 years ago.
Well, the internet is young, but yes, I get what you mean.
No, but even that's a good point. And I think in the beginning, there was very much this sense that you're either in or out. And I think it's changing. And I have evidence that it's changing. There's an organization in Israel, and I chalish to visit it. Like one day I'm going to do pilgrimage to that side. It's called, I'm going to say it in the Hasidic pronunciation because that's how I read it, but then I'll say how probably they call it. Berusu Beis Vad Lechachumim, right? So Baraka Bet Vad Lechachamim, right? It's a group they have a Facebook page. I'll send a link here later. And they do multiple times a week gatherings, full house, Hasidische songs, Komm sitzen, the children and the kigel, and they sit there on Shabbos, they sit there on La Shishi, and they buy into the culture. These are people who know the songs, they know the ways. And you can tell, like, if anyone looks at that and say, oh, they're not, they have nothing to do with Hasidim. Of course, there's so much Hasidishkeit there, but most of them are secular, and this is a new thing. And I think we're early days, and that we're not such a big community, but we are creative, and we are people who are passionate. We're not a community who is just going to leave and just fizzle out and go into oblivion. We're there to make noise, right? And I think we're seeing a more middle way forming of a culture of Hasidism, and where people feel there's a place for them to express the nostalgia and express, cultural elements. And I'm sure we'll go into this. I don't want to talk too much, but I think both of us have kind of experienced life in the Western secular liberal society, and I think both of us were a bit disillusioned. And we're like, we had, in some aspects it was better back home, in some aspects, right?
In some. Yeah, I think let's talk about that. Let's talk about disillusionment in general, which I think in some ways relate to the overall having room to grow. Having room to grow when you leave is having room to keep in touch with Hasidic life as you feel is nourishing to you, and also to question and become disillusioned. This is all part of the having room to grow that I find. I would agree we're starting to see that. Until now, it felt like you were pigeonholed into being an OTD person, and you're not supposed to criticize the world you entered, and you're supposed to keep criticizing the world you come from. And that's all people want to hear from you. There's nothing else anyone wants to hear from you. They're almost offended if you criticize the new world. And I find having room to grow and say, wait, I'm in this secular world where I'm raising a child in public school, and that's what the world I'm in, and that's the world I'm critical of, and I'm going to be critical of it. And I want to voice my criticism of it without being silenced. One of the most disappointing things is to experience silencing, which is how I have felt since I've left. Sometimes it's a subtle messaging, sort of don't say things. You've left, be grateful, stick to the script. You went to college, make yourself into a success story, the end. Happily ever after. And there's a silencing. Do you experience that?
I didn't have it so much in the OTD community, but I had it when I expressed heterodox views in university, with amongst the general university public, nothing to do with Jews, OTD, or anything. But I actually had a period when I was pretty disconnected from most things Jewish. When I was in university for 4 years, I hardly had any Jewish friends there. It wasn't a choice. An anti-Jewish thing was just in university. There's more non-Jews than Jews. So it worked out that way. And I felt, I came to university very idealistic, that I left a community that stifled my views and my opinions, and where I couldn't, and where I suffered bullying for not thinking like everyone else. And for some stupid reason, I thought that surely in the secular world and the liberal world, they're liberal, they're tolerant, right? That's the whole point. So
yeah, exactly. It's not stupid. Right? It's not stupid. I think they have led us on. They have made us think so.
Yeah. And I came to university, and I was really eager and curious, and I wanted to meet a diversity of people and have friends from all ethnicities and from all opinions and from all sexualities. And I was curious, and then again I found myself saying things and then facing very similar kind of social consequences that I felt I faced in the community. And it took me quite a few painful years to learn, to almost come to a more cynical but maybe more realistic view of society, where actually every community and every society has fundamental beliefs. And even, even societies that encourage questioning, and they have holy cows that you're not meant to question, because and it's funny thinking back, people often think that the Hasidic community or the Haredi community is a place where you can't question. And I often correct them, well, it depends on what. In fact, if you're a boy in yeshiva, you learn Gemara, you're literally being trained to question everything, right? So in a sense, to the contrary, you're really being encouraged.
Yeah, but you're not questioning the fundamental tenets.
You're not questioning the fundamental tenets. And I feel that's how I felt in university. I was encouraged to question, but on certain hot button topics that felt like amongst students, felt like the tenets, it's not, you're just not allowed to really discuss it on any deep level. You're meant to just, it's the kind of, even asking questions is subversive. But I wonder how I went through stages with that, because in the beginning, I was very bitter about that. There was a moment of disillusionment. And, I was bitter for a couple of years, and then I learned I don't want to be bitter. And maybe I just have to accept that society is messy and complex, and that people aren't perfect, and you just don't poke society. You learn to live with it, and to find your friends with whom you can be more open, and you learn that there is that's what I say. I became a bit more cynical, but also I think a more balanced view of society.
You've refined your character. For me personally, I have stayed bitter. I am quite angry. I feel like I deserve a refund for having been sold a bill of goods, being told in this world you can question, in this world you can go swim against the tide and people will love you for it. Especially when you're a woman who left, everyone is like, tell us your story. You're so brave. And 5 seconds later, they kind of side eye you because they have a sense that you are somehow not sticking to their expectations. It has been very frustrating to me, and I have not wanted to have gone through. I have gone through hell and back to get to where I am in my life, only to find myself silenced.
Can I ask you, do you think, looking back, and this is a very difficult question, but do you think, looking back with the knowledge you have now, do you ever think maybe I shouldn't have left?
No. I think I should leave the new communities also. That's more like my perspective. I should never sign up to anything. Be very wary of getting too deep into any. That's me, because then you are committed and they won't let you swim against the tide. People ask me, do you regret leaving all the time? It's the most common question I get, because I speak often fondly of the community. I honestly think that I would have lost my mind in that world, because it's so censorious and censorship is so high. Apparently censorious is not a word as I use it. I know. I thought it's not, apparently you can't use it that way. But it's the Hasidic community is, you have to really know how to play the game in order to be okay in life. And I have a very hard time with it. And I don't know. I feel like a little bit my anger towards my disappointment and anger towards not having this experience in the new world is a good thing. It's almost like it's not eating me alive. It's a little bit of a fight. That's how I feel. And sometimes actually I want to pivot with that, because I feel like a little bit of a fight in you is a good sign. It means you believe in something, you want something, and you're willing to put yourself on the line. And there are a lot of people who have that fight in themselves, who fight in some way or another for the community. And I wonder, is that an obligation? Is that a good thing? Is that something we should be aiming for? Are we traitors if we leave and we don't think about fixing the world we come from and its problems?
Yeah, personally, I'm done fighting. Personally,
on all counts, you're accepting.
But I take a very pragmatic view. I think, you ask, shall we fight to fix the society? What if, here's a paradox. What if fighting to fix can, in unforeseen ways, make things worse? Here's an example, right? The UK government wanted to basically force upon Haredi schools in the UK to teach about British values, right? So this is about teaching kids that sometimes parents have a mummy and a daddy and and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, and from often you hear from the kind of activist voices in the OTD community or in the secular community, you'll sometimes hear that being cheered on. You know, that's a good thing. We're making it more tolerant. We're making the community more tolerant. What if somebody is gay in the community? And I always think, yeah, it sounds very lofty, but is it working? And the answer is a resounding no. A resounding no. It's not what anyone who knows the community knows that you can't do that to the community. It's not going to work. These are people who would rather sit in prison all their lives than teach this, right? So what are you doing? You're just letting them lose their trust in government. And when it comes to things that they actually do care about, do have a stake in, let's say basic child safety or basic literacy, where lots of parents in the community do want that being taught, the community no longer has the trust of government, right? So this is an extreme example. But for me, I do want to fix things, but I have a very particular view of what fixing looks like. For me, it's only fixing if you're not making things worse, okay? Mm-hmm. So for me, fixing is helping an individual, okay? So organizations like Footsteps, Mava in the UK, who are helping people who really, really are in difficult places and they want to leave and they're helping them leave. For me, that's a mitzvah. You're helping an individual in pain and distress. And I know when I was there, how much I needed the help. But when you're talking about structural change or radical change, we're going to change the whole culture in the community. Often it's just not realistic. And often it's just making things worse because it's making it a culture war. And we know what happens when you make things a culture war.
Yeah, it becomes very antagonistic. Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of people get very upset if you say this. I personally, I also feel very strongly that there's a condescension. You've left and now you're coming in with your cape and you're flying in to save the day. Like, who are you? One schmoigers decided that you're going to change the world as if everyone is waiting for you to rescue them now that you've left. Like, who am I to? There are so many smart people in the community who are changing things organically from within. I watch the change firsthand all the time. I was just posting on my blog about Hasidic Tech College. These are innovations that are flying under the radar. Speaking of education, people are trying to find different ways. I'm not saying that there is no room for people from the outside to be activists. I don't know. I'm cynical about activism in general.
The thing is, change can't be forced. Like if you want to have a 100% safe way to make sure that practice does not change in the community, take a lot of secular liberals and make them push this on the community. You guarantee this is not going to change, even if it would have changed on its own, right? Because then it becomes a fight. And the community has this narrative. This is the Yavunim, was kommen in wegnehmen the Torah, and jetzt kann man spielen der Idol im Wald. The second it becomes the Goyim want us to do something, that's exactly when we're not going to do it. I think the best change comes gradually, comes in a moderate way, comes by helping individuals in specific needs rather than making big structural changes. I feel very passionately about the education in the community. I don't think, again, I want to be careful here. I don't, there's people, some of my friends believe very passionately about it. I don't think that having governments day and night pressuring the community to do it is the way forward. I haven't shown me the successes. I haven't seen the successes. So I think another way, the different way is supporting people in the community who want change themselves, supporting pop-up schools who come up who give better education, supporting individuals who want to supplement education through educational grants. That's a fantastic thing that you can do. Educational grants or courses or I mean, my own tiny way, I don't think it makes a big difference, but I've released last week a series, an introduction to physics in Yiddish.
On YouTube. And I've had feedback from a small but passionate group of people who've said that, they found it very interesting. And I think that's maybe a better way to improve educational things by pushing positive change, not by pushing things on people that they don't want it. But I'm open to other opinions. I know this is a very controversial view. There might be people in this room right now who strongly disagree, and I want to hear from you. And we want to hear from then let's hear from people. How about that? Should we do that? Let's hear, especially I think on this subject.
I just want to say before we do that, but I think because it's recording, anyone who will speak, if their video is on, you will see their face on the recording. So if you wish to remain anonymous, speak with your video off, or if you're not speaking, you won't be recorded. or put your thought in or question in the chat box, and we'll read it out.
Yeah, I think we have an active chat. I don't know. I haven't read it.
So Judah makes a point here in the chat. Historically, big efforts to change the culture has been very successful, also known as the Haskalah, but it's a bit avoided. But the Haskalah, okay, so Judah's referencing the Haskalah, the Emancipation and Renaissance, not Renaissance, well, yeah, Enlightenment. The question is, did it change because governments were forcing it upon the community, or did it change because internally the community wanted to modernize? That's my question back to Judah. I don't know. Maybe you know more than I do on this, but I have a feeling that in many cases, maybe in some cases, there were successful cases of, the government forced it as a policy and it got accepted. But I feel like in many cases, in most cases, probably, because I know in lots of these cases, these were met with fierce battles when the government forced these laws. And I think it contributed to the birth of Haredism, right? It did. Haredism was born in response to these emancipating Enlightenment things.
It was largely external. Personally, what I see in the current situation, and I think this might have historically played out, that we see people who leave become very powerful voices because they have left, but internally there's also a lot happening. You don't see it, it's under the radar, but a lot of the change is happening because it's just a time of change. I see the Hasidic community as in tremendous evolution at the moment, as it's changing away so drastically from the post-Holocaust to a very Americanized consumerist society. I see a lot of internal change. So I think, I don't know what it was with Haskalah, but I think this is my own perspective on today, that while you hear a lot of OTD people, there's a lot going on quietly on the inside that's changing things. We have a hand.
Yeah, let me unmute him. Yeah, if you want to say something or ask something, you can raise your hand with the icon or physically raise your hand and we can see it.
Yeah, hey, Izzy and Frieda. Thank you very much. It's really interesting to hear your discussion. In many ways, I feel I have similar reactions to like the outside culture as you did, in many different ways. But I just wanted to comment on the comparison to Haskalah. I think that Haskalah was only successful, the external influences that try to reform the culture, the Jewish culture in some way, was only successful because the then Orthodox Jewish community, whatever, it wasn't called Orthodox at the time, but looking back, it can be seen as the Orthodox faction of Judaism, wasn't built in a way that was meant to guard outside influences. As soon as Haredism kicked in, the whole dynamic of Haredism was to put frameworks in place to insulate ourselves from others, for that very reason, to not allow cultural influences to kick in. Before that, Jewish people were just like Christians in a way. They were influenced by modernity, by the Industrial Revolution, by Darwinism, etc. But as soon as Haredism was put in place, it created intentionally from its founding, basically a wall around us for just that reason. So that makes it a bit more difficult for cultural influences to actually change the way of life in the community. Although the internet is a great tool, which can be used to change attitudes, to bring up awareness. And in my opinion, that's basically the only way of making change in the inside, by making people aware of, in subtle ways, of the difficulties that people might confront when they're getting older, without having a proper education, without understanding the world the way it is, etc.
That's a great comment. Thanks, Abe. I mean, in some ways, I think subtle is underrated. And I think it's also I think that the Haredi community today has such strong guardrails. It is so fundamentally built to resist assimilation that whenever you attack it, it's almost automatically ignites this immune response, which makes it so difficult.
Yeah, and that's why laws and government intervention is very difficult. It's very difficult to achieve anything substantial. Although when it comes to strict educational and informative changes, it might be a bit more helpful, as Izzy said, to enforce cultural revisions in the community through government. That's just a lost cause. It's never going to happen. But to try to stick to very strict like educational reforms, that might help.
I'm thinking we're talking here about, I feel like almost in this conversation, there's a tacit assumption that we want change, and we're just discussing whether government intervention is the way to go. And I would like, very controversially, perhaps, and I'm definitely going to get flat. The OTD community will find this quite disturbing because let me first say what I'm going to say, and then I'll maybe analyze why it's so disturbing. But I often really ask myself, can I objectively say that the life that I've seen my secular friends live is objectively a better life than my Haredi friends, my Hasidic friends live, right? And I feel a lot of us want to say, well, obviously, yes, they're free. They they live in the secular world and they have everything. And we were so restrictive, and we had to learn all day and daven all day and everything. But I've actually seen people in both societies, and I can't say hand on heart that one group of people is definitely happier and definitely living a more fulfilled life than the other. I can't say that hand on heart. I can't say it either way. I'm not going to glorify and say the Haredim are super happy. I can't say either way. It seems to me that both have. I've written an article about this roughly a year ago, about how the good and the bad of a community are often two sides of the same coin. We have this fantasy that we can almost, wouldn't it be wonderful if we can look at every society in the world, every culture, and take only the good but leave the bad, and build this super utopian society? Well, you can't do it because society is made out of individuals, and there's good and bad individuals in every community. So good aspects are going to manifest and bad toxic aspects are going to manifest. And the question I ask myself, and I'd love to hear the opinions of others in the room and of you, Frieda, is can we say, are you comfortable saying that secular society, or maybe secular society is a bit too broad, it's not really one community, but I don't know, let's say I was in university, there's definitely such a thing as a community, as a community of liberal academics, right? Is that a better community than the Haredi community? I can't say it definitely is. I can say that for me leaving was the right choice. I can't say that, but I'm me and my own psychology and my own personality,
Yeah, I refrain from value judgments because, first of all, I find it fascinating. And if I'm going to walk around saying what's good and what's bad, then I can't enjoy being fascinated by the complexities of human life. I like to see, we just talked about the Haredi's ability to protect itself from assimilation. That fascinates me. I'm not putting a value judgment on it. And this actually is, Shimon Brunstoffer asked what we mean by fix and change. I think it's a value judgment when we say we want to fix, we want to change. I think it's a very good point. I don't know what he meant by the question, but I think it's a very good question. What do we mean? What are we changing? What are we fixing? Who are we to decide what needs to be fixed? And especially in a society that we left, do we think we need to change it to the way we live? I don't take that shit at all. That's not my approach at all. I don't do value judgments.
I wonder if Shimon would be comfortable elaborating on what he meant, because it looks like an interesting comment, but only if you're comfortable to, Shimon. Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
You can.
Yeah, I'm just trying to ask, sometimes it feels like many people are walking towards a goal and there's no clear articulation of what the goal exactly is. I was kind of wondering.
What do you think we mean when we say we want to fix or change?
Sometimes it could mean improve the education. Some people have in mind to basically make everyone live, or basically some sort of hope that the community is going to be dissolved or something like that, which is obviously not realistic. So that's why I feel like.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you think about. Someone recently told me, I was talking to a journalist who said, I don't think anyone should live in the way the Hasidim live. That's what he told me.
Right. So often you hear, so when people say fix and change, they mean that. Well, it's okay. I just wonder, like, what the other means.
Well, I guess, what do you think? I'm curious what you think about fix and change. What you would use, what your perspective is on these different ways of fixing and changing.
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, me personally, I have children that grew up in this community, and I would love to see improvement in education. I would love to see improvement and more liberty, more freedom. But I understand that this community has some values and has some structure that whatever I want to hope for change, it's gonna have to be within this framework.
Yeah.
I
think that's very realistic.
Sorry, Frieda.
Good.
No, I find myself looking back at my own life. I think, there's some things. I'm definitely not of the opinion. I find it quite disturbing, actually, the opinion that every child who grows up in the community is a victim and needs to be saved, and it's a human rights issue. I find that a very toxic view, to be honest, and a very narrow-minded view. It is not. It has to be stated very clearly. It is not the case that every person in the community is a victim or oppressed. That is a genuinely offensive thing to say, and it's it borders on anti-Semitism. Not that I'm accusing anyone who says it of being anti-Semitic, but it's a very false, and it's a very almost like a cultural supremacist view of the world, that you've figured out the right way to live, and your way to live, that's the right way, and everyone who doesn't live that way needs saving. Which I think, by the way, Americans suffer from. I mean, the whole American foreign policy of the last 30 years.
Yeah, the West in general.
Liberalism. Yeah, but I do think, looking back, I think that in my own life, there's some things that I do sometimes think were child abuse. Well, not sometimes. Let me rephrase that. Some things in the upbringing of Hasidic boys are definitely child abuse. They're definitely things that damage kids. They're definitely things that damage kids for the rest of their lives. I know I will have traumas for the rest of my life from what I went through in Haida. And, I think that, I often grapple with, how much is objective, how much is subjective, these value judgments. And I'm very careful with not labeling value judgments as objective. But I do think that the way I saw my friends and the way I was brought up in the Hasidic community, the yeshiva life, where a 13-year-old is expected to sit, 12 hours a day and read books and suppress sexuality and close himself off from the world. I mean, we were literally told to walk like this in the street so we don't see anything. I think for a kid to grow up and literally not look out of his, of his sides when he walks in the street, I think I'm more comfortable saying that borders on objectively kind of harmful. Borders, I'm not sure if I can say it's 100% kind of objectively harmful, but I think there is a harm there. But then I'm thinking, maybe everyone, this is my hot button issue. This is, for me, the red line. Everyone has their red line. Some people would say, oh yeah, there's lots of things that find the community, but for me, it's, I don't know, that women can't drive. That's my red line. That's why I think it's so harmful. I'm wondering if you have a red line.
Me personally, when I walk through the neighborhood, I will see different people. There will be this little child who stares at us, and then there will be the little child that covers his eyes, and then there will be the little child who's oblivious. And I have different reactions to different children. The child that covers his eyes, I think, Nebuch. A part of me feels sad for him. Part of me thinks a zealot by nature. You're so young. This is probably your life path. But then the child who looks at us with a giant googly eyes, I see myself in, and my heart breaks. And I think this is such a hard, when you have that kind of hunger and curiosity, then I feel bad. So I mean, there's one it's a very infrequently that we see these kinds of children who are so openly curious. But I would say I think there are things that slide right off some kids and things that so deeply, deeply go into them that they are forever, forever impacted and they can never let go of that shadow. And I think that's very heartbreaking. And I do think there are some aspects, personally, I think there are some aspects of society that are especially liable to affect certain kids with very, very deep, very, very deeply in a very harmful way. I do think so. Not everyone. I don't think it will harm everyone in the same way.
There's a very interesting question from Naomi. I wonder if we can ask Naomi to ask it herself. It's a very interesting question.
Me?
Yeah.
Hi. So I guess I
Hi.
have in common with you that I inhabit a mostly academic culture, and also I'm constantly on the verge of, losing my job for saying, unacceptable things.
Nah.
You get kicked out of the Orthodox world and then, oh, academic culture, that's so free. Not exactly, let's just say. There's a kind of contradiction in academic culture right now, especially in places like religion departments where I am. I joke that I monetized my unhappy childhood. And in religion departments, sure, almost everybody's secular. They're the same as the rest of the world, what we call secular triumphalism. Yes, you should leave that backward insular world that you came from, and they're, fascinated and curious. But at the same time, it's actually the academic environment is now post-secular. And God forbid you criticize religion in a religion department. And I co-taught a class.
It depends which religion as well, doesn't it?
What?
It depends also which religion you criticize, doesn't it?
Exactly. Certainly not, Islam. All Muslim women really choose to wear the veil. That's the orthodoxy in religion departments. And if I said, oh, really? Obviously, I have some counter evidence to any kind of all Muslim women choose to wear the veil. That's the reigning different kind of orthodoxy. That's the reigning orthodoxy. So in some ways, the OTD experience, in some ways, what are you going to do with your life? Where are you going to make a living? Yeah, go ahead, get it. If you're lucky, become a professor of religion. On the other hand, you're the worst possible person to be in such an academic environment for the reasons that I hope I kind of and also because you're partly and the kind of nostalgia that there is for tradition, along with the along with all the critique of tradition, is just tradition it's beautiful, it's rich, it's right now I'm preparing a paper about a book by Jonathan Boyarin, who's a Baal Tshuva anthropologist. And that's a beautiful thing. But what's an OTD, professor? It's it doesn't add up on some level.
What do you mean?
Anyway, I don't know if that's a question, but those are my thoughts right now.
Well, we can change positions, by the way. I can take your professorship if you need me to relieve you of it.
Oh, believe me, I'm not complaining. Oh my God, I hate when professors complain about how hard their lives are.
No.
But I get it. It would be very hard for me to deal with academia. I couldn't survive, as much as it sounds nice. It's so hypocritical to say all Muslim women wear their head coverings by choice, and then to say all Jewish women wear their head coverings because the patriarchy forces it on them. And how can you be silent when there's it's so on its face absurd.
Naomi, do you feel, I often feel like we almost have two modes of looking at other cultures. Traditionally, there's the racist mode that we're definitely better, and those cultures so primitive and whatever. And then there's the opposite view that romanticizes these traditional cultures, right? And you mentioned in your comment that the Western world is going through its own crisis of meaning over the last couple of decades, maybe. We've abandoned religion and we want something more. And I'm wondering, there seems to be these two modes. Either you romanticize other cultures and you think they're better, or you kind of demonize them. And I'm wondering if we can do what Frieda does and just says, well, they're different. I'm, it's interesting.
Right. People are always shocked when I tell them, I don't know, they imagine that I grew up in this world that's like stained glass and candlelight. No stained glass. It was all like fluorescent lights. And community, like the fantasy, that community. I mean, I went to school with 1,500 girls. Community,
Yeah. Probably for me personally, the fantasy of community was something that bothered me the most. The sense that people projected a very rosy idea of community when you're among so many people, when you can actually be very lonely among thousands of people. There's so much room for loneliness.
Maybe to move on to a slightly to a different question. I had a question submitted before the event. So the question was, I'm going to read it out. It was submitted on Twitter through a private message. By a guy called, no, I'm not going to, it's not his real name, but anyway, maybe he has kind of a pseudonym that he would like to maintain. What would you advise to a young guy who stopped believing, married with kids? Should he take steps to exit? In other words, do you think a double life is possible, or is only a last resort? What do you think, Frieda?
Oh, God. So he's married with kids. Should he leave?
Yeah, should he live a double life?
People tell me all the time, how can I leave? Can you help me leave? I hear it a lot. It was a completely surprising experience. I was in a restaurant, a nice restaurant. And the owner of the restaurant saw that my business was named Visit Hasidim at the time. I changed it for that reason, by the way, because he saw my credit card and it said Visit Hasidim, and he said, what is this? So I told him, and suddenly we're in the whole conversation, and he's middle-aged, well off, has a bunch of children, and he says, I want real love. I want to leave. And my reaction is, oh boy, do you ever know what you're going to step into? You're unraveling everything you have here, and you will be at sub-000 there. And I think I was naive about how hard it would be on the outside, and I was relatively young, and I had one child. So I don't know, maybe because it's just, you've been through your trauma, you don't want to see anyone else go through it. You're like, I don't have the stomach to see you go through it. I'm never like, oh yeah, ever. My reaction is to feel stomach pain when someone asks me that question.
Yeah, and it so depends. That's why you can't give a blanket answer, right? Because it so depends on the individual circumstances. The case that you mentioned, you're absolutely right. I mean, you're going to destroy your family and your marriage and everything, and you're not going to make it on the other side, But often, if it's a young guy, and I mean, I was really, really lucky that I wasn't married with kids. I'm just so lucky, because it would have been so much harder if I was. And it's given me a kind of freedom that others don't have, to speak out and to be open, because I don't. I don't. But I think in a case where somebody's married with kids, what would you say about the approach of kind of trying to see if one can compromise with their partner and see, okay, she's religious, I'm not, maybe we can live a modern Orthodox life as a compromise or something like that?
I think it's an ideal. It's probably a couple has tried that. By the time, probably it's been something they've considered by the time he or she is thinking of leaving. I think they've already tried to move. I think the first thing couples do is they try to move to a more liberal place. And if that isn't happening, then you start to really chafe against the community. I guess one thing I really want to bring up on this subject is I often feel that people who say, I want to leave, don't understand what they will confront. And I'm like, before you take any steps and before you think about what you're going into, I wish you understood that it's not like in Harry Met Sally or whatever movie you watch. You watch movies and you see it's such a different vantage point, the world, from being in this insular bubble. And it's so hard to understand what you're going into. And yet, it sets you up for failure,
And yet, but you see, that's why it's such a difficult question. And yet, I don't for a single moment in my life regret leaving. I think it would have been a tragedy had I stayed. I was a young guy, single. It was definitely the right thing for me. And even sometimes that's why I think it has to be done on an individual basis. Let's be frank, some people sadly don't have what it takes. Like, it's not easy. It's not easy. And you have to assess, you have to talk with someone and say, how resilient are you? How independently minded are you? How much support are you going to get? Do you have what it takes to make it? And if somebody is young and determined and resilient, and they genuinely want to, and they know, they're not being delusional, they know how hard it is, and they have to be told, it's going to be hell. It's going to be hell. You're going to go through years of being at the bottom and just, it's not going to be easy, and learning everything from the beginning. But I think in many cases it is worth it.
As someone asked, Gittel asked, would your answer be different if that man with children was divorced, but with a frum family and risk losing children? It's not only you risk losing children, the children's lives will probably be very much impacted, presumably harmed reputation-wise, and trauma for the children if the parent becomes non-religious. We're not sages here. We don't have all the wise answers to life's most difficult questions.
It's interesting. Something we don't often talk about in the OTD community is the pain we cause when we leave, right? And the reason we don't talk about it is because, with some justification, we see ourselves as the victims in the pain. So yes, there's pain, but their pain is caused by their stubbornness or their intolerance or their closed-mindedness, whereas our pain is caused by oppression, right? And it's interesting, when you shift worldviews from a secular liberal worldview where we think in terms of human rights and bodily autonomy and choice, then absolutely, they're your captors. It doesn't matter if you need to kill them to get out, they're your captors. But that isn't the perspective we all grew up with, right? We know what it's like to think in a different mode. We know what it's like to think in terms of, hold on, your duty, you have a duty towards your tradition, you have a duty towards your family, you have a duty towards your faith, and you've gone and you've thrown everything away, and you've hurt your parents, you've ruined the shadichim of your siblings on the way, and you still have like the chutzpah to complain that you have pain. That's the opposite perspective, right? And often I think, this is often why families, they don't understand each other, because every side is coming from its worldview, and from its worldview, it's completely right. There's no other side even to apologize to or to acknowledge pain to or anything. And for me, it's very, I do want to see things from my parents' perspective or from my community's perspective. I do acknowledge I've caused them a lot of pain, and I do want to take agency. I do want to take responsibility for that as well. Not that I feel guilt for doing that, because I had to do what I did. But I did, I did center myself. I did prioritize myself, and I would do it all over again. But I've hurt people on the way, and it pains me that I've hurt them, and I do feel sorry for that. And I wonder if other OTD people, if you've ever thought about that way.
Yeah, no, I think it's natural. I think of being OTD a lot like, for instance, getting divorced. You often feel pain for the other person. You feel sorry for the other person. There's a lot of that with family relations. And I think a lot of people who are angry, that anger masks is a front for the hurt of having let people down, of having lost relationships, I don't think all OTD people see themselves as victims. I think in my perspective, Haredi often, especially Hasidim, like where we come from, the Satmar world, have a very hard time seeing our perspective. But I think most people who leave, to some degree, feel the pain of having, because it's heaped on us, the guilt, the messaging that we've let so many people down. I think a lot of people feel bad about that. I don't know. I'd be surprised if people are saying, no, I'm not feeling, if this wasn't the prevalent experience of being OTD, feeling like you've let others down.
Yeah, and I think there's a healthy way of doing that. There's a way of doing that. I feel like there's almost two extremes and then a healthy medium. On one extreme, you're feeling guilt-ridden. And I don't think that's healthy, because at the end of the day, it is about what you have to do, what's best for you. I don't think you should feel guilt-ridden. On the other end, you take zero, it has nothing to do with my actions, I was just a victim. And I think there's a healthy middle where it's acknowledging we have caused pain to our loved ones, and yet sadly it's almost, it's a tragedy that there's no perpetrators here, only victims. There's no perpetrators here, because it's just the pain that comes out of it comes from two fundamental worldviews clashing, and it's going to be painful. There's no way away from it.
Yeah, I think that's very, very good perspective on it. I do think, you have to do what you have to do, and you carry the pain, but let go of that tremendous guilt that is heaped on, on top, that you've hurt other people, which is not healthy. It's manipulative.
I see in the chat, Schmiel Kneppelmacher.
I love Kneppelmacher.
That's a great name, Schmiel. I wonder, you made some interesting comments. Would you like to switch on your mic and share some of your thoughts? Oh, he's in the waiting room. It looks like he left and is now coming back. All right.
Mr. Kneppelmacher.
He's coming back. He's coming back.
All right, Schmiel, if you can hear us, would you like to share some of your thoughts? How can we unmute him, Frieda? Ask to unmute. There we go. Don't think he's unmuting. Anyway.
Schmiel, we were talking about your comments, if you're there. All right.
Yeah, maybe I'll read out what he said, because I think he brought a more classical OTD perspective that I shared at some point, and I think it's worth bringing up. So one of the comments Schmiel made is, education cancels religion. It can't go hand in hand, which is,
yeah,
it's definitely a perspective I held at some point. There is a sense in which the religion that we were brought up with, we were that, what, I'll give to Schmiel, I'll say to Schmiel, the amina that we were brought up with probably is true. That amina, that kind of, because we were never taught it in a sophisticated way. We were never taught it in a way that you can make up your mind, that you can question, that you can read evidence or anything like that. It was just, you have to believe in it. And the second you think for yourself, the second you read other books, I think it falls apart. But there definitely are people. There's large modern Orthodox communities, large religious people are very educated. I mean, the head of the national, the NCH, the American kind of health organization. What's it called?
Yeah, the national no. Okay, the American health, the Fauci's department.
Right. The head of it is a guy called Collins, or was a guy called Collins, wasn't it? Francis Collins. And he's a very religious person, and and he's a top scientist. So you definitely can be religious and educated.
Ich bin ein Narr in ich Gleib. In ich Gleib as in, what do you mean? NIH, yes, NIH, sorry. The National Institute of Health.
Yeah. Another comment made by Schmiel is,
I don't know if his comment didn't come from a religious perspective of saying, if you bring in education, then you lose religion. So we have to.
Yeah, so Schmiel thinks that they're mutually exclusive, right?
No, he says that is the go-to answer to everything. I don't know if it's his perspective. Schmiel, it is really hard to know what you think with one-liners.
Yeah, Schmiel also says earlier on, when we're talking about changing the community and the community having a right to different lifestyles, so Schmiel asks, it boils down to, do people have a right to retain their primitive lives? And I think, firstly, I mean, the word primitive is very loaded, right? There's already
a primitive is very loaded.
But even, yeah, I think absolutely people have a right to maintain their primitive lives. I mean, I think they can ask, should people have a right to maintain their ultra-modern, post-modern lives, people have a right to live whatever lifestyle they want.
Yeah. It's also, who are you to know how people should live? How are you so clever that your way of life has gone through all times that ultimately it is so good that it should be imposed on other people? To me, it's a tremendous chutzpah to say, well, my lifestyle needs to be imposed on other people.
Yeah. I think we should probably leave kind of the official part of the event here, because we said we'll be an hour and 50 minutes. So I think what we'll do is we'll kind of officially close the event, so people who want to leave kind of can leave, and but I think both Frieda and I will stick around for more informal discussion, to carry on chatting, and people can join us.
That sounds great. Thank you, all of you, for joining us tonight. It was really, we had a really great, lively conversation. It was really a pleasure to do this with you, Izzy.
Thanks, Frieda. Thanks for having me. Maybe just to leave people with one thought. I don't know, going back to the idea of what's important and what's not important, right? I think we live in a quite polarized world. There's a culture war raging, and we're hating each other. And often we're hating each other because they hate other people, right? The reason I hate you is because you're a hateful person, or I'm not tolerant towards you because you're not tolerant. And I think this is a cycle of hate and division that I think we can stop. And I think we need to think about what's important to emphasize in all of this, in religious differences, in political differences, in cultural differences. And I think, it's clear to me that the most important thing is that we're all human, and we all share that, and we all love and feel pain. And we all have things that stay for us. And that includes our values, our beliefs, how to raise our children. And we need to be tolerant to other people, even as we think they are being intolerant. We can't use tolerance as a reason to, further division. So I don't know, something to leave to think about.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and the value of tolerance. You have my own mind.
Okay.
Yeah.